Welcome to Capitalism That Works. This is a joint production by GlobalTreehouse and myself, Jesper Koll. I very much hope that you enjoyed the previous 8 sessions. And I actually thought that we would end with the 8 sessions, but I've had a lot of questions and commentary in response to some of the sessions. And as a result of that, we've decided to make this add-on session. This is specifically in response to the one big question that everybody asks me. Jesper, you may be right. Yes, Japan is a model of capitalism that works, but it's Japan. It's very specific. It only works in Japan. It cannot possibly be a lesson. It cannot possibly be applied anywhere else because Japan is so special. It's a homogeneous culture. It is a society that works together, that lives together, that is very quick to actually compromise individual freedom over the collective goods. And as a result of that, Japan, yes, is a model of capitalism that works in Japan, but cannot work in the United States or anywhere else. Now, I think that the proper answer to this is, actually, you're wrong. Japan can work in the West. Japan can be a great model for a form of governance, a form of capitalism, a form of a free market economy that actually balances individual freedoms, the rule of law, as well as economic efficiency and societal stability. Remember, in the 8th session, the final session of the main series, I offered the 2 rules of what I've learned about the Japanese during my stay here for the last 35 years. And remember, the first rule was never ever underestimate the ability and willingness of the Japanese people to suffer together. So that's the strong collectivist element that you have and that many anthropologists point to when they look at Japan. But then remember rule number 2, which is never ever underestimate the ability and willingness of the ruling elite to make sure Rule 1 is applied. And this is a key point that yes, you've got a strong collective identity and ability and willingness to sacrifice for Japan, but more importantly, the ruling elite in the Japanese democracy are actually willing and capable of applying these sort of rules for the collective good. And it's important. Japan is not a totalitarian state. Far from it. It is a very well-functioning democracy with a super strong focus on individual rights. It is a democracy with a super strong focus on due process and equality of the law. Whether you're the CEO of a top Fortune 50 company, or whether you're a garbage collector or an unemployed person, in front of the Japanese law, you have exactly the same rights, and these rights will actually be applied. But the difference is that here in Japan, the ruling elite is not afraid to go against the vested interest. And whether it's technology companies, whether it is financial companies, whether it is individuals, the Japanese ruling elite will make sure that the law is actually applied. It is not a law that can be bought by money. It is not a plutocracy. And look at the big example. The big example is, of course, the financial crisis. We've had a big financial crisis here in Japan in 1995. Then in the United States, we had the Lehman shock, which led to the global financial crisis. And then, of course, we had the Euro crisis. So all the major economies in the world over the last 30 years had their big financial crisis. But Japan is the only country where the regulatory framework governing the financial system has actually changed in response to the financial crisis. This is very interesting. And again, the point being that it's not that Japan is different, it's just that Japan is actually rational and pragmatic and is not afraid to adhere to what the great economist Lord Keynes said, when facts change, I change. And of course, a financial crisis is a huge change in facts, and it is very clear that yes, the regulatory framework needed to be changed. Specifically in Japan, after the financial crisis in 1995, the government decided to embark on regulatory reform, and they set up a new unified financial regulator, the Financial Service Agency. And this agency was made up out of the bank and securities supervisor, which used to be in the Ministry of Finance, and the commodities supervisory body, which used to be in METI, the Ministry of the Economy, ripped out, creating a new unified supervisory body. The banks were angry, the commodity traders were angry, the investment bankers were angry at doing this, but it was the right thing to do, and the result is that the financial crisis here in Japan did actually trigger a fundamental change in the way the financial system is governed. And I think it's very clear that in the United States, in Europe, the response to the financial crisis has been a lot of huffing and hawing, but nothing fundamentally has changed in the way the banks are being supervised, the security companies are being regulated, etc. So just wanted to point out that Japan's model of capitalism does work, can be a model for the West, but you've got to recognize that it's actually Japan that is not rigid. It is Japan that is actually changing. It is Japan that uses a crisis as a catalyst to build back better, while it's not clear that the West has used a crisis to actually build back better. And this gets you to a fun part. Because, when you step up away from economics and society in the realm of cultural study, by which, of course, I'm not an expert, but I do find it very interesting to point out that when you look at the word of culture, where it comes from in the West and where it comes from here in Japan, they're fundamentally different. In the West, the word culture comes from the Latin word colere, which means to plant, to put firmly into the ground. In contrast, in Japan, the word culture means bunka, which is two Chinese characters. The first one is the word for word or sentence, and the second one is the word for change. So while we in the West put something firmly in the ground to be rigid, the Japanese concept of culture is one of being flexible, of being adaptable to change, of actually being pragmatic. And I think from that perspective, yes, of course, Japan does have, like any culture, its little idiosyncrasies and special aspects, but in terms of the way the economy, the financial system, and society is governed, Japan's form of capitalism definitely is a model worthwhile studying, and you will find that the ability of the ruling elite to actually adapt and change the institutional framework and the overall structure, that's something where Japan is much, much better than the rigidities that have crept into the political economies of the United States of America and Western Europe. So from that perspective, I think Japan, yes, is indeed a model of capitalism, a system of capitalism that can work, and I think we would all be better off to study and look at it in more detail. Now, I want to thank you for listening and viewing this series. Please do go back to some of the previous sessions where we go into detail for some of the specific aspects that make Japan's economy, make Japan's financial system, make Japan's society a model of capitalism that actually works. Thank you very much. This is Jesper Koll and GlobalTreehouse. Thank you.